Welcome to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. My guest today is Adam Wade, who is an incredible storyteller. New York Times calls him an enchanting storyteller, who might argue. He's a 20-time Story Slam winner at the Moth. He's a writer, he's a storyteller instructor, media producer. He's the creator of the #1 best-selling Audible original audio memoir, You Ought to Know Adam Wade. So we are looking forward to getting to know Adam Wade here and learn all about his secrets to storytelling. So here we go. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Hello, Adam.
How are we doing, Doug?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very, very good.
So anyone who's heard you tell stories, and there's legions of them because you've been around for a while, knows that you are originally from New Hampshire, but just full disclosure, you are not currently in New Hampshire.
No, yes. At 22, I moved to the New York City area, and I've been here since. I've been in New York City for about 10 weeks at NYU. I had summer housing at Rubin Hall on 5th Avenue and 10th Street. And then I moved to a place called Fairview, New Jersey. It's right near the George Washington Bridge near Fort Lee. I was there for about 4.5 years. And then Hoboken, New Jersey. Shout out to my friends in Hoboken for 19 years. And then the past 2 years in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Cool.
So, and that's where I am right now. And that's where I'm located right as we speak.
Jersey City, New Jersey. Got it. I've been there. Hey, so I first heard you, and this is, I confess this to be true. When I saw this poster in my current hometown, or at least close to it, in a place called Rosendale, New York, where you're doing a show up here, a storytelling show. And I was going like, holy crap, a 20-time story winner of the Moth. I got to go to this. I'll be there come heck or high water. And then I think I wasn't sure if it was heck or high water, but something happened. I didn't go, and I couldn't go. But thankfully, I've been able to get hold of you and get you on this podcast here. And so...
And I just want to just say, if there's any fans that went to that show, it was unbelievable. We sold out. It was just a really, really nice event. And actually, I think 3 of my former students were also performers on that show, at least 4. Yeah, Becky, Gina, Carla Katz, and Will Clegg. So there was 4. So it was like an Adam Wade love fest. And the audience was unbelievable. We talked about this off camera. I just want to let you know, when we do these shows outside of New York, you're driving up and you don't know what kind of crowd they're going to be. It was packed, and they were just awesome. It was just like a highlight. I had a rough summer, with COVID and family deaths, but it was awesome, and it was a real highlight, and I needed it. So I just
right.
It was a really, really highlight of my summer.
Well, you're welcome. Speaking for all of us up here, I personally wasn't there, but I stole your poster.
Yeah, good.
So tell us about that. So you are 20. That's obviously it's your 20-time Story Slam winner of the Moth. But you said you have students. You teach storytelling.
Yeah, so for the past 14 years, I've been teaching at a improv theater in New York City. It's called the Magnet Theater.
Oh, sure.
And it's a 6-week class, 3 hours a class, and then we have a class show like the 7th week. So I guess I don't want to say it's a 7-week class, but it's it's a 6-week class with a class show after that. And yeah, I've been doing that for 14 years. I've had over 3,000 students with those classes, and it's just, and I'm sure that when you had instructors on these, jerks don't take those classes. I just really, really nice people. It's been a very wonderful thing. I continue to learn as an instructor through my students. I found the one big thing is, and I'll probably interrupt you 10 times during this, but I'm continuing to try to be a better listener. And so I've just been very, very fortunate, but I get excited. So sometimes I like to interrupt, but I've learned a lot about storytelling and about teaching. And fortunately, just really, really nice people have been taking these classes. And for
Cool.
14 years, it's amazing.
So let me ask you this: when you create a new story, and just by the way, I'm going to switch this formatting around a little bit, but
Hey, yeah,
pretty cool, huh?
yeah.
I have a great producer up there in the control booth.
He's doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
When you personally start a new story, Moth stories, as most people know, but let's just make it clear, are true. They have to be true. They're supposed to be true about something that happened to you. So you're telling a personal anecdote of something that happened in your life. That's the key to Moth stories. Other stories, I'm an Ericksonian hypnotherapist, so Erickson would tell stories about moths or little animals, or he would make things up. He would tell stories about his childhood, but they had a therapeutic intent, so they were very, very different. The Moth story is true, but it also has to be entertaining. You can't just go up and say, well, first I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and sort of have a play-by-play account as what you had for dinner on Thursday. It has to have something that is entertaining. It's not stand-up comedy, but it has to be kind of entertaining. So how do you structure a story from like, oh, I could tell about that picnic I went to or whatever? How would you do that?
Yeah, I think laying out some moments, not worrying about what you learned from it, but more how you felt. I really try with the play-by-play. I'm glad you brought that up. Many students come in with a very play-by-play thing and tell them to slow it down a little bit and think about as these things are occurring, how did it make you feel? And usually by saying that, how did you feel then? How did you feel now? Getting caught at Inspiration Point, which was the airport in my high school years, with my grandmother and my great aunt. They wanted to look at they wanted to watch in the small town I'm from in New Hampshire, watch a couple airplanes take off. We got caught. There was a bunch of, popular kids at the airport making out. And I'm there with my grandmother and my great aunt. We're just watching airplanes. How did you feel when that happened? I wanted to like disappear. I wanted to be like vapor and poof. I was just so embarrassed to be with them. How do I feel about it now? Who cares about those kids? They were jerks then, they're jerks now. But here's Yaya and Ariti, I'm Greek, my grandmother, my great aunt, they're both passed now. And, not a Saturday goes by where I don't think about being with them, because I will always, they would take me out to eat. So it changes kind of like the dynamic where it's like this nerd gets caught at make-out point with his grandmother and great aunt to, like, why did I care so much? And just trying to thinking about that. And there could be funny, you're there and how you're reacting and stuff, but it's more here and how you felt and how you feel.
Your stories are often humorous. Do you intend to put humor in, or does that just sort of happen? How important is humor in a Moth style story?
Yeah, for me, I've learned over the years not to try to be too funny. Just be yourself. And if I try, it's the great thing with Moth storytelling audiences is that they're there. Most of them, I'd say 99.9% of them, are rooting you on. And as you're telling your stories, you're looking to connect to them, and they just want that connection. And part of the connection is feeling something, and there might be joy and laughter, but also knowing, like, if you try too hard, they're pretty good at picking you out. It's just like, a lot of times, especially when I first started, I would tell jokes, and I did a lot of comedy shows. I've done a lot of comedy in my time here in New York, and I would really kind of lay it on, and they were always kind of like, And I think the times I got a lot of laughs, mainly through either my reactions to something happening as I'm saying it on stage, or that they relate to it so much that they let out a laugh.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Do you write out your stories when you're working them out? Do you do it on paper and pen, or yeah?
Yeah, I'm more of a bullet point guy, person. I like to do. I mean, I'm working on things. It's all bullet points. And when I say that, I've never been a writerly person. When I do that, I seem to get bogged down. When I have students that are professional writers or writers, I always tell them, like, do what works best for you. But I think you must know that there's a big difference between writing stories and then getting on stage and telling stories.
Yeah.
And again, and just throughout the podcast, like this isn't the end all be all. This is just me talking based on my experiences. So other people might have different opinions, and I totally understand. This is just through what through my experiences. But breaking it down into a bullet point, for me, it helps. I'm not very good at memorizing as well. I mean, I took Shakespeare, and we had to do monologues and soliloquies, and I just remember not doing very well. But having a bullet point, most of my stories, I lay them out as chronological as possible. So if you miss something, you can just kind of go back to it. And doing that, I feel like I have a better connection with the audience, which is my main intention, to connect to the audience. And if you forget something, you can just, like, if we're having a conversation right now, Doug, and I forget something, today I had oatmeal for, breakfast, and tonight I'm gonna have grilled chicken. By the way, for lunch, I just had a tuna sandwich. I mean, you're not gonna like be, oh my, how dare you? Like, you said breakfast and then dinner and then lunch. Like, so I think even that, it's not looking for perfection.
Right.
Just and knowing each time you tell the story, it should be a little bit different. It should come out a little bit different because you're a human.
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. No, it's been very painful to me sometimes to watch people who have clearly been working really, really hard on their story for the Moth. They've worked really, really hard on their story, and they've memorized it. And then at some point or another, maybe they forgot something or get lost, and then they just sort of stand there like
House of Cards. It just collapses
forever. Yeah, it's so painful. So yeah, that's very interesting. So it's a little bit different every time. Do you? I know there's advice that I've been given and often give others, that you have a good starting line and a good finishing line, so that you know like how it's going to end and you know how it's going to start. Is that something that's true for you?
Yeah. I think that's definitely helps. It definitely kind of puts everything together, and especially towards the end, you're not rambling on and on. You want to get to your point and kind of stick with your point and stop. I think that'll definitely help. I think beginning with a good line, or a good situation. Again, I don't think it always has to be verbatim, but yeah, I think totally that helps. It keeps you focused, especially when it's a Moth story, when it's like 5 to 6 minutes long. That's when, and I think this goes for presentations too. I mean, in your coaching, I really think to have something set, I mean, you're gonna find some comfort in that. The one thing I would say too is, if you forget things in your stories, it's okay. If someone comes up to you after a show and says, "But Doug, then what happened?" Wait, Doug, wait, you did this, and then you skipped this whole thing, and you're like, "Oh, I don't think it's such a bad thing. I don't think," and I want to repeat this to people, I don't think it's such a bad thing, because that person came up to you after the show and wants to know more. I think that you've connected, because at the end of the day, what's the point? You want to try to connect to an audience. So if they're asking you, so now you're after the show, you're by the bar or you're on the street, and they're asking you, they want to know, you have formed this connection, and now you can continue to tell them about it, as opposed to, "Hey, Doug, great story. I know everything about you now. I have no questions whatsoever." So I think that's okay.
Do you have a sort of technique for, you say the most important thing is to connect to the audience? How do you do that? How how do you connect to an audience?
My opinion would be to be as honest and authentic as you can possibly be under the circumstances of getting in front of a large audience. And if that means shaking a little bit, your voice quivering, you're grabbing the water and it's shaking a little, that's okay. And I think even pointing it out sometimes, hey, I've been going, like we talked about, I've been coming to the Moth for 3 years. I never put my name in the hat to get picked. Tonight's my first time. I think being honest and authentic in that type of environment, with that type of audience, they're gonna love you. I mean that, and they're gonna. If at the Bell House where they have their Moth story slams a lot in Brooklyn, there's 400 people in the audience. There's 15 names in the hat. If this were an easy thing for people to do, we wouldn't have much work.
Right.
And then also there'd be 400 names in the hat.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's not in. So most likely the audiences is something like that. Like, I mean, wow, he's been coming for 3 years. He finally got on the stage. Wow, I'm enamored with this person.
Okay.
I want this person to succeed right now.
Right.
So I think there's a very strong connection, I think, with being as honest and authentic. And by doing that, you're bringing something to the stage that no one else can bring.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
There's a lot of imitators, but there's only one you.
Everybody else is taken. Be yourself. Yeah. So, how do you go about getting a story down to 5 minutes? If it's because I will tell you, I've often thought, well, this is a short little story, and then I tell it, and it's like 15 minutes or something like that, and then so to try to get it down to 5 is a gargantuan task. How do you go about that?
Yeah, if people immediately go to old YouTube clips of me at the Moth when I had hair, I tend to talk a lot faster. And I think that was up to a point where, like I said, I'm constantly continuing to learn and hone my storytelling. I just thought I could just talk a little bit faster. By doing that, I put myself, it's just not the smartest thing to do, because in storytelling, especially even when it's a short story, you want to leave some type of mark. And if you don't give the audience time to just kind of let it sink in, and you're talking over the laughter, or you're talking over a big moment in the story where people should be just kind of taking it in, you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage. So when I look back at those, it's not cringeworthy. It's me at that time. But I think now what I would try to do is keep the story a lot shorter. There's so much road I want to cover. Maybe I'll just cover this much road and see how it goes. And I think leaving things off. You think I need to tell them all these other things that happen after. Maybe it's just keep it in the moment. End with a cliffhanger. I think leaving people wanting more is underrated, and it still continues to be underrated. Case in point, there was a time where I told the story. I told a few stories for a few years about not getting girls, and I would ask a girl out, she would say no. And then it would be kind of like poor Adam, and the audience loved it because he was like the underdog, this poor guy. I'm winning each time. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I just keep. And then one time, and in New York at this time, this was about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, most people that went to the Moth, these shows, it was like 75% of the same people went each time. And a gentleman who seemed like a fan, he bought me pizza one time. He was a great guy, tacos, fish tacos. Came up to me after a show, and he said, nothing for nothing, Adam. Every story is about you not getting asking girls out and them saying no. Have you ever asked a girl out and she say yes? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, why don't you tell that story for once? And he walked away in like a huff. I'm like, wow, the next month, literally the next month, I'm on stage, I'm telling a story, and the whole story was me asking a girl out at the local bar in Hoboken. She says yes. We're going to go to Maxwell's, and we're going to get chicken pot pie in Hoboken, famous Maxwell's. And I'm waiting there with a bouquet of flowers, waiting for her to show up, and she never shows up. So it's like, poor Adam again. And I'm telling that story and it's like it's a 5-6 minute story, and I'm at like the 2 minute mark, and I tell this audience, and I walked up to this girl, we were having a nice conversation, and I said, "Would you like to go to Maxwell's Friday night?" And she said, "I'd love to." And I looked at the audience, and I'm 2 minutes in, and I saw that guy in his face, and I remember what he said the last month, and I ended right there, and I just said, "Thank you." And I've been performing on stages for 27 years now, comedy, music, everything. I have never received the applause or the reaction that I received that night. I mean, they went crazy because they had seen me for a couple of years telling stories about not getting girls. And then all of a sudden they heard this story that he finally got the girl. And they went crazy. In 2 minutes, I'm pretty sure I won that night on a 2 minute story at the Moth. And what happened after was, guess what everybody asked me? How was the date? And I just said, that's a story for another night. That's a story for another night. I refused. I don't. But it was that thing where I gave them something that they wanted, and I wish I had learned that sooner. But it took me kind of, and I was like reflecting. I'm like, wait, like that's okay. And sometimes it might be a sadder story, ending on the happy note part of the story. Sometimes, don't we deserve to have some victories too? So I mean, there's a lot to that whole thing. I mean, give yourself a victory every once in a while on stage. You deserve it. People feel like they need to have this poor so and so. Sometimes it's like, no, it's not like that. People actually, even in classes, sometimes, Doug, I'll give like a defeat prompt, and everybody loves those. I mean, like myself included. I'm just telling you, love the defeat prompt. But then when they have the victory prompt, tell us about a time where you succeeded. Nobody wants to touch that. You know what I mean? And I think people should reach out. Yeah, but it comes off bragging. Not really. If you tell it in an authentic way and how much it meant to you, people are going to relate. And people are going to want to see people succeed and be hopeful.
Cool. Love it. So I'm very curious. I mean, I know that you've won 20 story slams, and the story slam is always they want it to be a 5-minute story. So I have a bunch of questions, but I want to ask this one first because it's coming up next. But once you win that, then you got to go to the grand slam and you got to tell a new story, also 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
But then if you win that, then you go and tell a 15-minute story, right? Or a much longer story?
I think it's about 10 minutes. Yeah, about 10 minutes. Yeah.
So is that, if you've been focusing on 5-minute stories all this time, is it harder to then tell a 15-minute story and keep it interesting for that long? Because suddenly it must seem like a long story.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it just gives you more breathing room. I'm not saying, I mean, it's a 5-minute story and I just let it breathe, but there might be, I try to, when they're longer stories, I'm trying to think about maybe a little bit more what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And more, and going back to that feeling thing and stuff, like how did I feel then? How did I feel now? I'm looking for a little bit more layers. I'm thinking about the relationships that are in the story, and with it a little longer. A lot of times, you have no choice but have it almost like one-dimensional when it's a 5-minute story, because you just got to hit everything.
Yeah.
When it becomes a little longer, I'm not splitting an atom, but what I'm trying to do is, pardon the pun.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to look at it a little bit more through the lens of what is the real meaning behind this story, possibly. Why am I thinking about this story so much? And I ponder those questions. And definitely ponder the relationships. What are the relationships within the stories? Can I add some more senses or some more dialogue to the story? So you're not really changing much of the beginning, middle, and end. It's just you're looking at it in a little different way. Could there? I asked a girl to marry me, and she said no, and it's a quick story. And then it's like I asked a girl to marry me on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I had a mariachi band, and I had and she said no, but I felt like she never got over her last boyfriend. So it's not, and we had this discussion, And we ended up breaking up after, but I kind of understood things more, and it wasn't like I felt bad for myself. I wished her the best. So all of a sudden, these things kind of change, even though the story is very much the same.
Mhm.
And I think you get to know people, know characters, know the storyteller a little bit more.
Cool. Excellent. Now, you mentioned the phrase before, get to the point of the story. You want to get to the point. Matthew Dix talks about the 5-second moment in a story. Have you heard him talk about that?
No, no.
Where he says, because these stories have to have an impact, he says every story is about something that happens. Like there's a 5-second moment where something happened and suddenly like, oh, on the other side of this 5-second moment, I'm changed. I'm different. That's kind of what Moth stories are supposed to be about, that something happens that you change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And he says it's in a little 5-second moment that he also says is pretty close to the end of the story. So you get to the point and then it's over. Is that something that you think about as well? Kind of like getting to the point of the story near the end, or not?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it can give a lot of storytellers direction. For me, when I'm going about stories, I'm talking about things that mean something to me, and I'm hoping for that. Perhaps, but I'm not. I take my time figuring out, probably too much time trying to figure out what the story is about. So part of the process, um, something will happen, or something actually doesn't happen, and then it's like taking it in, thinking about it, um, kind of nurturing that time and those ideas for a little while, lining them up chronologically, the events that have taken place, see if there's additional events. Then from there, just spending time, like, and then finally, once I have these ideas laid out, then I just try to look at it, and maybe that's where that comes in. But I don't overthink about it.
Okay. So what do you mean?
But I do think about but before I go on stage and tell it, I do think about, at least at this point, what is this about? I've been pretty good about, like, not circumlocution, talking around and around and around and not having a point. I mean, we've all heard people say to make a long story short, which doesn't make the story shorter, makes it longer. But I mean, with what he's saying, it probably would have helped me 20 years ago, put me on the right line. But like, I do it a lot harder. I do it the harder way, unfortunately. But I do, before I get up on stage, it's like, what is this version going to be? What is this version right now going to be about?
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
And so when you work things out and create those bullet points, how do you know what to leave out? One of the things that Matthew said, I don't need to compare it all, but it's just something I've studied his work a lot, is he says to start as close to the end of the story as possible. And so, like, for instance, if he tells a story about going to a wedding in Phoenix, he doesn't start off like, I went to JFK to get on a plane to go to Phoenix. The story starts like, I'm arriving in Phoenix and I'm going to this wedding, so that you start close to the end of the story. Especially, I think it's important in a short story, like a 5-minute story or whatever, to, start closer to the end. How do you decide what to leave out of if you start off with a fairly long experience that happened and you got to get it down to, between 3 and 4 or 5 minutes to tell it at a Moth? How do you decide what to leave out?
Yeah, I think what it comes to is, prior to, like, that, say I have a show on a Friday, and on a Monday I start working on it. And like I said, laying things down, thinking about ideas, putting thoughts down, nurturing these ideas, coming to a point where I think I might know what it's about. Once I find out what this version's going to be about, because it continues to change for me. I mean, what the story is about. And if kind of walk in like, okay, this is about my first kiss. All right, I'm going to write about my first kiss. That's what it's about. And my first kiss, I kissed a girl in eighth grade on the Washington, D.C. class trip in April. I would look at everything that I had written and put down in these thoughts. And I always keep my notes very, as you can see, very organized. When I say that, I date it and I staple it. So if this is what it's about for tomorrow night, say it's Thursday and the show's on Friday, if this is what it's about, what here doesn't need to be here? And you just ask that question. So there's like tons of things, what we ate on the bus ride to, like Matthew Dick says, I mean, on the ride to Washington, D.C. I mean, does that, and this is a story about my first kiss. So you just find the things but there might be something where she was on the bus and she looked over at me and she smiled, as we passed Jersey, you're like, oh, okay. So you definitely keep that. I mean, it was the first time a girl looked at me and smiled like that, wow. So that's a precursor to actually the kiss. Mm-hmm. So I think that definitely helps. But I think going through the process and having a lot of these things down and written and saved, because the story is going to continue to change and you're going to change as a person, and so having all those things, maybe the story was originally about my first kiss, but then it's about how I never really ate a lot of fast food. My mother always cooked I love her. We had a very bland diet, and then I'm going to DC for 5 days and we're eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and Burger King and McDonald's and KFC, Pizza Hut. My stomach just couldn't take it, and it becomes more about, not bodily functions, but it's more about stuff like that. So when I actually kissed the girl, I ended up throwing up on her. You know what I mean? So which is true. She knows it. I mean, she remembers. But so all of a sudden it becomes kind of like that type of story. And then as you continue to evolve the story and thinking about it, it became about the first kiss, which was like the victory, right? Then it became about me getting sick on her, which is like disgusting. Then it comes to that Monday at school when we returned, and how she told everybody that we kissed, and I denied it because I didn't want anybody to know, because we were up on the no one else saw me throw up on her but her. So she's telling and I'm just denying it. And then I have this realization by lunchtime with all these denials that she didn't tell anybody that I had thrown up on her. She was just bragging that she kissed Adam Wade. So all of a sudden this one-dimensional story about a first kiss and then kind of a gross out story becomes this thing where I've carried my whole life, where there's like, and I kept denying it because I was 13 years old. I didn't know what to do. And how I later wrote her a Facebook message when we became when she actually gave me a Facebook friend request. And I just said, like, I'm so sorry that I did that as a 13-year-old. It wasn't fair to you, but I wanted to let you know. And she's married with kids, so it wasn't like a come on. But I want to let you know, I'm glad I was able to share my first kiss with someone like you. And that changes the whole dynamic of it. So I think letting these stories, and then her reaction, and I explained my eating thing and everything to her, and she's like, wow, that's a lot of information. And then she ended it, I'm glad you were my first kiss too. And, I wish you all the luck. And I love following you on social media. And I'm so glad that we were able to talk. It's just nice stuff. You know what I mean? So giving yourself that time to think about it and let the stories evolve. It's not like a movie. It's not Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid where the movie's going to be the same every time you see it. It's going to continue to evolve. And that's the great thing about storytelling, because you're evolving as a person. And that means if you're 60, if you're 70, if you're 80, you're continuing to evolve. These memories and these stories continue to evolve. And they should. They should.
So, the Moth often has these themes, right? So it's going to be about, I don't know, the first kiss or the first time of something, or maybe it's about I don't know. They have themes, so I'm not coming up with any offhand. But how do you get a story so quickly for a particular theme? Like, for instance, if you notice that there's a Moth coming up in a couple of weeks, or maybe like you said, Friday. How long does it take you to come up with a story to that theme? And how do you do that?
Here's the thing with me, and I highly recommend the viewers and the listeners of this podcast do this at any age. You go into a closet, you take out a box of shoes that you have or sneakers, and you use that shoe box, take the shoes out or the sneakers out. And when you think of story ideas, not whole stories, just anecdotes or not even anecdotes. I remember that time I struck out with the bases loaded, or I remember when I got the basket to win the game, or we went into overtime, but then we lost. Write it down. I can just show you these notes. I have like note cards, and I'm always jotting things down and putting them in the proverbial shoebox. And I date it, and I write legibly so I can read it. You have to be able to read your own handwriting. That's a must. And then when you have these themes and stuff, you see them, and then you look through the box, and a lot of times it's like, I'm stumped. I don't know where else to go. So I hit that basket, but who cares? It's not really a story. Then all of a sudden you're looking at these themes, and it's like, whoa, and that definitely helps. But having a bunch of ideas, and a lot of people, students of mine will say like, oh, my ideas, they're just silly.
Right.
Come on, they're not silly. If they're your ideas, if you have strong enough feeling in these anecdotes or these short little snippets to jot it down on a piece of paper and then put it in the shoebox.
Right.
And it accumulates. I mean, do you practice what you preach? I'm not going to tilt my thing around here, but I have milk crates full of notes, all very organized. And I mean, we're all going to die of something. I'm not going to die of writer's block. I got enough for the rest of my life, and I'm confident. And here's here's where it comes in. I'm extremely confident that these ideas, if I spend a little time just thinking about them and maybe playing some music from that time and just kind of maybe talking to an old friend on Facebook or Instagram about that event, stories are going to come out. Stories are going to come out because it's connected to here. It's connected to here. And that's where the therapeutic, it's not therapy, the therapeutic parts of your life, especially as you get older, they're there, and it's nice. And then, like I said, laying it out, thinking about it, and saying, well, this shot, it kind of changed my life in a lot of ways, because it was the first time in those years where, like, I was the hero. Like, you're going to look, you have a lot to look back on. I think that's why, as you get older, I'm in my 40s now, but I'm telling you right now, I couldn't tell stories like I can now when I was like in my 20s, because I can look back. I have a lot more experience now. I talk to a lot of people. I listened a lot more, try to other stories, and I see what I can relate to, and then I put that back into my own stories. So I just think that, just thinking of these ideas, letting them rest. Some of them, it's dusty, it's starting to get moldy. I mean, it's 8 years I've had it in that shoebox, but there's going to come a time where you're going to pull that out and you're going to think about it, you're going to work on it, and you're going to have something really strong. It's patience sometimes.
Got it. Love the advice of taking the shoes out first. That's probably very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, take the shoes out first. I'm just.
But all your notes might have a new shoe smell. So that might be a good thing.
Which might be triggering a story. Yeah. So as an example, I just did a quick little Google. So the next Moth slams, story slams, is called Give and Take. So their theme is give and take, and it says, prepare a 5-minute story about the push and pull, an eye for an eye, a quid pro quo, the art of compromise or lack thereof, finding balance or disrupting the system, a tit for tat, giving in or seizing the crown for yourself. What do you bring to the table? So that's their kind of story prompt. And the idea with the Moth is everybody who tells a story that night is supposed to have a story about that. And do you ever have a story that you've maybe prepared for some other story slam? Or you say you're going to tailor it to fit that theme, or how do How do you,
Have I? Like you wouldn't believe. Yeah, I mean, I've gone, but the great thing with that is, so what you're saying, Doug, is you work on what was a give and take, and you have this great story. You're ready to go. You put your name in the hat. Well, at the story slam, they only pick 10 names. So if you're one of the remaining, if there's 15 names in the hat and they pick 10 names and yours isn't one of those 10, then you don't get to go that night, which sometimes isn't such a bad thing. You might be a little bit frustrated, but then, you're not supposed to repeat stories at the Moth. Many do, but you're not supposed to repeat stories at the Moth. So, you take that story that you weren't picked, and now you got to try to find a different, try to find the next prompt that might go with it. And sometimes that makes the story even better. And for me, it's happened many times where it's like, okay, it didn't really, it fit, but it didn't really fit. This one, bingo, it fits. So yeah, it can actually work to your advantage.
yeah.
And you have more time to think about it too.
So when you say you're not supposed to repeat stories, I mean, if you haven't told it, you're not repeating it. So
Exactly.
you can reuse something that you hadn't told, but you're not supposed to just tell the same story that you told at one Moth at another Moth.
No, yeah. They're very, or at least in years ago, they were very strict about that.
Yeah. Cool. And now, when you tell stories outside of the Moth, because like this thing was just you telling stories with some of your students as well, do you adhere to the same sort of rule set? Do you have it be a true story only? I mean, is it still?
Yeah, for me, I'm not a good BSer, to be honest with you. And in my teaching, there's a terrific storyteller named Elma Baker that I know well. That she was a producer for This American Life. I think she just left that job, but she had a great memoir, her first book that came out, and at the beginning she put like a thing where, and I'm not doing it justice, but it's like 90% of this book is true. The 10% is sometimes you have to change names because you don't want to offend anybody or hurt people. Sometimes you have to combine time, which I understand. So if something happened to you sophomore year in high school, and then also junior year, if you make it, it happened sophomore year. So I think that type of thing. I'm totally fine with that, and that's in my classes. I just think you don't want Abe Lincoln showing up and unicorns and especially if it's a non-drug related tripping story. So I think you want to keep it as set in reality and in a real story as possible. And I think that's good. But I think changing names, I think combining time. I think that's fine, stuff like that. As long as it's as true as it can be. I mean, and that, again, that's I agree with her, and that's how I kind of think about it. And it's not the end all be all, but that's what I try to instill in my own stories and then with students.
Right. So it should be said that there are lots of different ways of telling stories. And as I mentioned earlier on, Milton Erickson and Ericksonian hypnosis, there are lots of stories there, but there tend to be teaching tales, and there's a message, if you will, that's there for the therapy and the therapeutic outcome. There are also lots of people who tell stories. Like my cousin, as an example, used to go around Vermont to tell stories to school kids in libraries. She was.
Is it Odds Bodkins?
She was Miss Frizzle.
Oh, Miss Frizzle. Okay, yeah. Because I remember there's a guy, Odds Bodkins, who was great.
I know that name. Yeah. But that's not her first kiss, or telling stories about that sort of stuff. It's she's doing a character and she's telling stories that are written, and she's reading from a book and having the kids story time sort of thing, and that's fabulous. It's wonderful. People tell indigenous stories and to bring forth the wisdom of the ages, and that's fantastic. People tell stories that are written and they read them, maybe act them out with great vocal impersonations and stuff like that, which I don't do very well, but they do, and they're great stories that way. But your way of doing it, Moth way of doing it, basically, is we talk about something that happened to us, and the experience that we had. And I love how you say, be as honest as possible and talk about your feelings about it. And that's how you make the connection with people. And that's the perhaps most important thing, is to have that connection, because people that's what people are wanting, I think, at those things. You're right, that they want to feel that connection.
Especially in this day and age, I mean, when you think with all the computers and everything, with the laptops, with the phones, you go to a place like the Bell House for those storytellers. I mean, there's a reason why the Moth keeps selling out. You know what I mean?
I tell you what, I've gone to a bunch of those at the Bell House, and they are standing room only. They are full. It's a bit intimidating. I've gotten on stage like 3 times, and it's just like, oh my God. Plus the lights are so bright in your eyes. It's like, you can't see them.
Yeah, that's a little beef I have. Like, I mean, I used to love that, Doug. I used to love performing when the lights were so bright, I didn't have to see anybody. But I think, we're talking about connection. Even shows I do now, if I have any pull, I tell them to, put the house lights up, put my lights down a little bit. I want to see those people.
Yeah.
I mean, part of that, and again, or, there's some people when they talk to audiences, they look above them. I want to look at them. I want to, and there might be a guy like, you know what? I want to look at him. Okay, that's the one guy I'm not connecting to. You know what I mean? But I want to see that. So it's like lights up.
Yeah. That's really neat. That's really cool, because that's really helpful. And of course, that is, for a lot of people, the reason they don't put their name in the hat, because it's scary to be connecting with all those people and being honest the way you talk about it. It's really quite a courageous thing, I think, to get up there and your stories, they're honest. They're like, bodily functions. I know a lot about Adam Wade's bodily functions.
Yeah. But hey, it's weird. I mean, I'm gonna lose about half your viewers right now. I mean, a very nice girl cooked for me in New York City, and she did not cook the chicken fully. And I was on a train, and I literally had to go to the bathroom because of that, and there was nowhere to go. And when I first told that story, I'm like, oh, it's a poop story, and what ended up happening is
poop story. Is that the theme of the night? Yeah,
I mean, I've definitely done those shows. And the thing is like who as an adult is gonna relate to that? There was a lot of people. There was a lot of people that related to it, and my goal was, you're making it a very one-dimensional story. How do you make that? And I mean it, like, just the embarrassment and the, trying to get off the train and people are watching you, people, and then, seeing your current boss, I mean, how do you do that? And people like, people that I don't want, like you saw in the audience that you would never think poop themselves in public had. You know what I mean? So I think part of it's leaving out the disgusting parts.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that they can put the rest together.
Right.
But I mean, it was, I think, just focusing on the feelings of embarrassment and this and that. But it was quite therapeutic for me to know that, I'm so glad you shared that story, because like that happened, and then they wanted to share and it was, that's a good thing. Again, that's a good thing. They wanted to share, like, oh, I want you to introduce you to my wife and this beautiful girl. Yeah, it happened to me on the subway. I mean, it's like unbelievable. So it's weird how, when they talk about vulnerability, this and that, sometimes it's just being you, like, and going on stage those 3 times at the Bell House and telling stories, that is vulnerability. And trying to your best to be your honest and most authentic self, that's vulnerability. It's not getting all emotional and stuff. It's just being you. People love that. There are people out there that crave to have that connection in 2023.
Yeah. So how do you structure you have a 6-week class that you teach, and How do you structure your class? What's the first lessons? Or
Yeah, it's great. I mean, the first lesson, a lot of it, the first class is get to know people. There's usually about 12 to 16 people in the class. We get to know what brings them to the class. Many people are actors. Many people are in finance. Many people are in real estate, lawyers. It's all different people from different backgrounds. And as the weeks go, it just, they become just friends. They become like a community through these exercises. Also, me creating an environment where they feel comfortable to share. There's a lot of positivity, but why not? Why have negativity? So you try, and I give them certain prompts, and again, it goes back to the more victory, less defeat prompts. Let them feel good about themselves. Let them talk about their friends and family that means something to them. And as the weeks go, and in between, giving them lessons on how to put together a story, what makes a story interesting, what are some key elements to put together a story. And then by week 4, they've shared a lot, they've gotten along, and then we start doing a little more feedback, because I think doing feedback right away, me personally, and what I've experienced as a teacher, how do you give people critiques or type of feedback? I always call it feedback, not critiques, because you're not critiquing, you're helping them, giving them some feedback. If you don't know the person, or if you haven't really seen them perform before, I've been in writers groups where I've gone in, they're like, you don't talk like that, from strangers. I'm like, you have no idea who I am. What I mean? Not I'm Adam Wade, but it's like, you don't know, you have no idea who. So that's how I talk. Like, so I think by weeks 4, 5, and 6, when they're giving feedback to each other, they know each other well. They in those classes, they really get to know each other well fast. And when they're getting that feedback, it's optimal. And the great thing is I tell my students, I mean, there's some feedback, you're going to listen to all the feedback. And it's great when feedback differs. You're going to use what feedback works best for you. You're not trying to please everybody in the class, but you're going to pick what works best for you. And going back to the idea of letting it slowly percolate and see where it goes, by weeks 3, weeks 4, then going into weeks 5, you're still finding out what this story is about. So then when you have to edit for like week 6, you've kind of gone through this process. You've been thinking about the story nonstop. It's evolved into this new thing. And you really clearly know this is, I'll ask, like, what is this story about? It's about X. And it's like, bingo, you're ready to go. And then we have a class show. And it's one of those things where you invite friends and family to the show. You're at the Magnet Theater. You're at a nice theater in Manhattan, right by Madison Square Garden. You're under the lights, but you can see the audience. And it's just, and then we go out for a drink after. It's just a wonderful night.
Right.
The greatest, and it's not American Idol. We're not picking who the greatest storyteller is. We're looking for individual growth. There was a woman one time that took my class. This is probably my proudest. In teaching 14 years, there's a woman, she's like, I'm 65 years old. I've been married for 35 years. I live in Long Island. My husband never lets me out of the house. We kind of laugh. She's like, no, she's like, I've dedicated my life to my husband and my 2 kids. And I go, well, what brought you to this class? And she said, well, when I was a little girl, my mother took me to Broadway once, which is sad. I mean, they lived on Long Island. She only got to go to Broadway once. And she's like, I saw all the actresses under the lights. And she said, once in my life, I saw a dear friend of mine took your class and performed at the Magnet under the lights. And she's like, for 6 to 8 minutes, I've dedicated my life to my family. I want to be the center of attention for 6 to 8 minutes, because that's the length of the stories. And I thought it was the most beautiful thing for her to say that in the first class. I mean, that's my first impression of this person. She got up to do her first prompt, her first assignment that week 1. She literally got in the ball and whispered to the floor and was shaking with nerves. And I mean, I'm not a miracle worker. And I was just like, oh boy, I don't know how, I'm like, try to look up. She looked up and then she looked back at the floor. I'm like, oh boy. And when we were leaving, I just said, great job. You got up there, because some people don't even get up in that first class. I go, you got up, you told the story. It was beautiful. And I go, I hope I'm going to see you next week. And she said, don't worry, I'll be here. And I was like, it's sweet, but I've been teaching enough. I know, I probably won't see her. First person walked in 15 minutes early the next week. And I was like, wow, this is like this. I'm in like this is beautiful. And she worked so hard, and she started looking up more, and then she looked down at them. She was shaking less. And in that environment, she flourished through the 6 weeks, and everybody in the class we were all trying to help her. And she was also trying to help everybody else, you know. Right. And when we got to that class show, she came in, and you know, I'm like, where are your husband? Where are your kids? And they're like, yeah, they didn't want to come. And I said, don't worry about it. And she felt bad. You could tell in her voice. She was about to cry. I said, don't worry about it. Your class husband's here. Your class kids are here. Mm-hmm. And she smiled, and she got up on stage. She told her story. And I'd always go like this. I need to hear you. I did not have to do that once. Crystal clear, no microphone. She spoke. And at the end of the show, I just said, I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And she looked at me and she said, just thank you. She's like, I got what I always wanted in my life. She's like, for 6 to 8 minutes in front of a crowd of about 100 people, I was the center of attention. And I got to tell my story the way, you know, I felt really comfortable with. And, you know, it's like that's what it's about for me. That's success, you know what I mean, for me.
That's great. And I think that's a really great place to think about it, because, you know, frankly, most people, I don't know actually who my audience is, but probably most people don't live in the New York City area. They don't go to the Moth shows at the Bell House in Brooklyn or anywhere else that they happen in Manhattan, or Boston or Chicago. They don't do the Moths. They're not ever going to do the Moths. They don't want to do the Moth, but they might want to tell a story at a family reunion. They might want to do a toast at a wedding. They might want to.
And those are the ones. I mean, I literally got a text. I'll pull it up. I mean, this is one of those things. I'm so glad, because I won't say his name. It starts with a B, but he said, "Hey brother, gave a best man speech the other day and really felt confident going up there with no notes and delivering it in a conversational way. Thanks in part, big time, to your class."
Right.
I mean, you know, that's, you know, I mean, so absolutely, it's not just for the Moth, and all the things we've talked about in this hour. It's not just about that. It's just about life, and you know, being able to get up and be comfortable and talking about someone you care about, and maybe having an anecdote or two at a anniversary party or a wedding. That's going to stay with those people for a long time, as opposed to just kind of going all over the place and being crazy, you know.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. We kind of got to the point there. So,
yeah.
Adam Wade, if people want to get hold of you, can they go to adamwade.com? Is that your website?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to adamwade.com. And I just want to thank you, Brett. I really enjoyed watching and listening to a lot of your podcasts, and to have me on, you know, it's been a great honor. I really appreciate you reaching out and asking me. So
cool. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. And if you'll don't go away, we're going to close off the recording, but you stay where you are, because I have one more question that I have to ask you privately.
Okay, sure. But thanks to your listeners too, and the viewers. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. See you next time. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.